all that is. Moment 7. Things that do not ask for thanks. By Subbudu. Read by the author's AI voice. The past is a foreign country, they do things differently there. And there, in that soot-stained, fever-sweated, eternally queuing republic called India, land of ancient gods and ration coupons, of overpromised futures and undercooked dreams, what they did, what they perfected, what they made into religion, art, torture, and lullaby, was wait. Children waited, he waited. In Madras, where the red oxide floor grew cold under your buttocks as you sat pretending to study while mentally counting down the days to the new Lion Comics release. And across the subcontinent, through Bombay gutters and Calcutta rooftops, across the sun-bleached terraces of Hyderabad and the fog-sour lanes of Delhi 6, past the cassava fields of Palakkad and the biscuit factories of Punjab, into the railway colonies of Jolarpet, through the slums of Dharavi and the stitched-together dreams of Shivajinagar, they waited. In Jaipur, children lined the platform railings and waited to board the palace on wheels, the Maharaja's old saloon cars reborn as a hotel on rails, holding imaginary tickets for a journey they could not afford. In Bombay, the boy with the torn banyan who hawked postcards outside VT station waited in the monsoon for the white man in the black ambassador car to lower his window and photograph his face into history. In a housing board colony in Secunderabad, kids waited for the foreign return uncle to visit with a suitcase full of American things that smelled like a different air. In Kerala, children waited for remittances rather than letters, for blue aerograms from Dubai, for money orders that came once every 2 months and brought with them the permission to eat chicken. In Madurai, the girl with oiled plaits waited for her mother to return from the firecracker go-down with 10 rupees and a hug. In Ludhiana, the boy whose father guarded borders waited for the telegram that did not come, which meant another day his father had not died. In Delhi, they waited through curfews and sirens and slogans. In Kashmir, they waited for school to reopen after gunfire. In Bangalore, the boy with glasses waited for the MS-DOS course to begin, although he did not know what MS or DOS was. In a Tamil fishing village, the girl who had never owned a clock waited for high tide the way others waited for God. Children of teachers waited for promotions. Children of priests waited for miracles. Children of mill workers waited for shoes with tongues. Rich children waited in bungalows for parents who were always flying somewhere important. Poor children waited in school gates for parents who lifted cement sacks and dropped their spines into the road. They waited outside textile mills. They waited in the backs of temples. They waited inside auto rickshaws where their mothers stitched blouse hooks on foot-pedaled machines. They waited by firewood, by sugarcane juice, by dogs in heat. They waited for someone to come pick them up, who often never did. Some waited outside casting studios for a chance to cry on camera for 25 rupees and half a samosa. Some waited outside cricket stadiums with no tickets and Sachin-sized dreams. Some waited outside tailoring shops with torn receipts and newly shrunken hope. Some waited outside doors that had no vacancy written in chalk. Hotels, hostels, hospitals, humans. Children waited for siblings to be born, then for them to grow up and stop being annoying. They waited for puberty with a panic that looked like hope. They waited for their underwear to be laundered, their notebooks to be returned, their names to be called. They waited for cricket bats they couldn't afford, for tap water that arrived like a trickle of approval, for power cuts to end, for girls to notice, for teachers to be absent. They waited for fever to rise, for fevers to fall. They waited to ask questions, and when they were old enough, they waited to be allowed to speak. They waited for fathers to stop shouting, for mothers to stop crying, for God to show up on Sundays and festivals and test days and marriage proposals and movie releases. They waited for letters from Singapore, from Canada, from Muscat, from the boy in the next class. They waited for things they didn't know they were allowed to want. New slippers, new friends, new names. They waited with class, with cost, with calories. With one textbook shared among three. With mosquito bites blooming into maps. With torn underwear and 80-mark exams and a stomach too empty to hold ambition. Waiting was their condition, the default mode of subcontinental childhood. And their waiting, though mocked by time, made them philosophers, liars, dreamers, poets. Because in waiting they built entire civilizations in their heads, imaginary worlds, imaginary friends, imaginary candies that never ran out. They waited until waiting became an inheritance, until they became parents who taught their children how to wait. And in this billion-person choreography of suspended motion, in this circus of delayed everything, no one waited harder, longer, more lovingly, more pointlessly, more feverishly than the child who waited, with fingernails bitten and breath half-held, for a 5-rupee comic book named Ulaga Poril Archie, Archie in the World War, to descend from the rain and justify all the days that had come before. But some forms of waiting, he would later learn, were assigned by no government, no parent, no railway platform. Some were chosen, self-inflicted, glorious. He waited for comics. Tamil comics, translated, transplanted, denationalized epics of alien wars and detective duels, machine men and morally ambiguous cowboys, all draped in Tamil like imported chocolates rewrapped in banana leaf. It began, though this is not that story, on a third or fourth grade morning, years before the Wednesday in question, when his mother, sari, rustling and office-bound, took him by the hand and led him through a shortcut lane that was both map and mythology, the most honest stretch of madras he would ever walk. The walk from Velala Street to Miller's Road was, in official terms, no more than 500 steps. It was through a small lane that was called Miller's Lane. On a good day, if you were late, it took 2 minutes. If you weren't, it took an hour. It was a subcontinental artery, paved in spilt rice and spit betel. This was the unspectacular daily India, the kind that never made it into tourist maps or national slogans, but lived forever in your clothes. The houses were pressed close together, double-storied, angular, painted in unpredictable pastels that had sun-bleached into oddities, guava pink, paya brown, mosquito coil green. Some doors had brass knockers shaped like lions. Others had none at all, just children's handprints in white paint from Ayudha Puja 3 years ago. Half the population was Tamil, the other half Telugu, with floating units of Malayalam-speaking tailors and the Hindi mother-in-law relocated by marriage. Caste announced itself silently, on foreheads marked in vibhuti ash or vertical namams. On the way, women tucked their sari ends, over shoulder, around waist, and in the quality of the doormat. You could see shirtless men in striped lungis yawning on their thresholds, reading Dina Tanti upside down, scratching themselves like it was religion. Grandmothers with arms like broomsticks and cheeks sunk by the gossip of 70 years sat on plastic chairs beside steel vessels, calling out prices of coriander before the vendor even arrived. Women wore large bindis that could be mistaken for an extra eye. They returned from the butcher's with live chickens wrapped in newspaper, their beaks peeking out like political dissent. There was a man fixing a punctured tire using fire and spit. A boy running with one chapal, the other sacrificed to a puddle. There was always, a Lambretta scooter that wouldn't start, being pushed by a thin man in a thick helmet. Leaking pipes ran like open veins along walls, where moss grew like secret gods. The TVs were always on, black and white, volume maxed out. Somewhere a radio cut through them, Vivid Bharati announcing, Inikki Pattu Kekkuravanga, Ramasamy from Rajapalayam, song requested, Ilayanila by SPB, and you never saw who listened, but the song floated out anyway. weaving through drying saris like radio incense. A transistor sat on a step, playing cricket commentary from a voice that sounded half dead and half bored. There were smells: boiling rice, burnt milk, incense, socks, diesel, cow dung, arapu powder, gossip. There were people who had jobs: teachers, clerks, bus conductors, and people who did not but looked like they might someday: failed typists, overqualified mechanics, ex-students of life. There were boys with nothing to do and lungs full of charminar smoke, standing behind walls pretending to look at the sky. There were tailor shops the size of prayer rooms, where a single man stitched a blouse while chewing on thread and heartbreak. And there were children, everywhere. Girls carrying water in silver pots they were too small for. Boys with torn shorts, their pockets sagging from marbles. He was one of them. But also not. Because that day, the walk was an initiation into the country, into the city, into the secret universe where small lanes told bigger stories than highways. He hated it at first, the narrowness, the smells, the open intimacy of it. Valala Street had seemed like the world until then, broad, familiar, mapped by routine. This Miller's Lane was another country. He was in the 3rd grade, a child, the kind that did not cross from one end of the world to the other on his own. But that day, his mother handed him a book at the end of the lane, got on her bus, and vanished into her workday. And he, book in hand, walked home alone for the first time, past pipe leaks and transistor songs, past other people's porches and personal gods, past everything that makes India too large to explain, but somehow small enough to carry in your chest forever. In those days, parents did not call to check if you had reached home. They believed you would, and most likely, you always did. And at the other end of Miller's Lane, Miller's Road. A name, like many others in Madras, left behind by the British like a half-eaten tin of quality street on a summer afternoon, familiar, unmelting, and sticky in all the wrong places. Miller's Road, so named for no visible mill, there were none unless you counted gossip as grain, was one of those leftover colonial labels the city forgot to peel off. No one remembered the miller, if there ever was one. Some said he baked, some said he ran a dispensary, some said he was just the first white man to fall off a cycle on that stretch and earn immortality by embarrassment. But the name stuck, long after the empire left, long after the bakery became a biryani kadai, and long after R.N. Mudaliar built South India's first film studio there, as if cinema had always been waiting to replace the crown. Miller's Road on that day gave him his first comic, a Lion Comics issue, Tamil letters and English frames, full surrender. After that, the virus took hold. He read everything, and by everything we do not mean casually skimmed or went through, but read, the way prisoners read cracks in the wall. He read each book 50 times minimum, 200 times not unusual, and certain rare, divinely anointed issues, Atisayathival Archie, Steel Claw versus Dr. Shock. He read 300 times or more, to the point that he could narrate panel sequences backward while brushing his teeth, as though possessed. Comics were planets. And he became a small fevered astronaut, launching every week from the launch pad of that Miller's Road shop, whose name he forgot, but whose layout, smell, and bundle string haunt him still. But that story, the one about the comic craze, about the paper-stapled religion of his youth, deserves its own scripture. Still, a footnote must be offered here, for context, for confession. He believed, with the arrogance available only to lonely geniuses and Tamil middle schoolers, that no one else read comics like he did. Krishnaveni's son Ravi did, but Ravi was a blunt force reader. If it didn't have an explosion in the first 3 pages, it was deemed useless, sentimental, or worse, girly. But he was different. He read the speech bubbles, he read the asides, he read the editorial footnotes in the back. He read even the romance comics, Those soft-focused Tamil translations with names like Minal Kathal and Mayakam Siripu, where men in bell-bottoms with sideburns rescued women from kidnappers who mostly spoke in ellipses. It was, undeniably, the golden age of Tamil comics. Lion, Muthu, and Rani, like some accidental holy trinity, were all at their aesthetic peak. A typical Lion or Muthu comic: bold fonts, glossyish cover, and a plot with at least one international smuggler, cost anywhere from 2.25 to 3 rupees. Rani Comics, their cheaper cousin, had a flatter form factor, slightly wider, slightly taller, often printed with cheaper ink that smelled like wet slippers when new, and cost between 1.25 and 1.75 rupees, depending on the story, the season, and possibly the moon. But the anniversary issues, the sacred, exorbitant 5-rupee monsters, those were once-a-year revelations. And only two ever earned his devotion: Tex Willer in Dragon Nagaram, and this prophecy, Ulaga Poril Archie. He knew the characters, Victor and Thompson, two brothers who controlled the robot. He knew Archie, the Iron Giant. Crimson from dome to boot, riveted like a railway boiler, eyes round and lidless as torch bulbs, arms of jointed pipe that had folded rifles in half. On the cover of an older issue, he swung from a jungle vine over a river of open-mouthed hippos, entirely unbothered, a machine on holiday. The half-slapstick, half-destroyer of evil. He didn't know that Archie was adapted from a foreign pulp universe. None of them did. They believed the writers of Lion comics were geniuses, madras-based demigods who conjured robots and Nazis and global wars from an office on Miller's Road itself. And for that year, which was 1988, that month, that week, that Wednesday, the only thing more urgent than Archie's arrival in World War II was his arrival on Miller's Road, tied to the newspaper rack, hanging like divine laundry between two rusting bulldog clips. The final 30 days became a kind of religious observance, marked on no calendar, carved into the soft tissue of his brain. August slipped past like a pickpocket, taking with it his ability to concentrate on anything that did not involve Archie's arrival in Ulaga Poril Archie, the upcoming 5-rupee magnum opus that had, in his mind, already won all known literary awards, including a Booker, a Bharat Ratna, and possibly a Paramvir Chakra. Midterms came and went in a blur of neglected margins. Independence Day arrived, accompanied by tricolor sugar candy, bleary classroom speeches, and the first telecast of Mail Sur Mera Tumhara on Doordarshan, a choir of Indian legends, Kamal Hassan, Balamurali Krishna, Kapil Dev, Sunil Gavaskar, and more, singing of unity in 14 languages, veins pulsing with patriotic harmony. For most of his classmates, it was goosebumps and pride. For him, radio static. The merging notes reached him as mechanical hum. The montage of India's diversities played, and he saw only the moment Archie would drop into the battlefield. While India was humming a song about unity, he was humming a different tune, the clank-clank of an iron robot waiting his turn. He was as patriotic as the next boy in his row. He simply had more pressing matters. Archie, the robot, was about to enter World War II, and he still didn't know whether Victor or Thompson would be holding the controller or if the Nazis would bring tanks, planes, or dinosaurs. Because in Tamil comics, that was always on the table. He began a countdown, a private one, conducted in the ritualistic silence of true devotion. He counted the pages of old comics, rereading every Archie appearance in the Lion back catalog with forensic intensity. He timed himself, how fast he could read, how fast he could feel. He acted out the fight scenes in his bathroom mirror with his toothbrush as a weapon. He practiced laughing like Archie. He considered learning German in case Nazis spoke in the new issue. The week before release, he was a wreck, a ghost in the school building. He would sit in class, mouth slightly open, staring past the teacher, past the blackboard, into some imagined battlefield where Archie was probably making a joke while drop-kicking a tank. His classmates learned long division. He mentally sketched blueprints for a robot's spinal column. His mother asked him to buy green chilies. He came back with peppermints and no explanation. He refused to eat anything spicy, for fear it might interfere with his comic-focused dreaming. On the final 3 nights, he began to hallucinate plot twists in his sleep, dreaming of cover art he had never seen, hearing the sound of pages flipping even when no book was in his hand. He walked past the Miller's Road shop twice daily, trying to make eye contact with the newspaper man as if to say, "You and I both know what's about to happen." In this countdown, the rest of India faded. It didn't matter what Parliament did, what cinema released, what uncle died. The only relevant truth was this: a robot with a square jaw and an iron body was about to enter history, and he had to be there, front row, wet shirt or not, 5 rupees in hand, moral compass uncalibrated but eyes wide open. The storm had been promised on Sunday, like a telegram from the gods delayed in transit. It was coming, they said, yes, yes, surely coming, on Monday morning, first light, direct from the Bay of Bengal. Then they said afternoon, then they said perhaps Tuesday, and on Tuesday they said Wednesday, by which time Madras, having been stood up by weather before, had already begun its long practiced wait. This was waiting of the chaotic civic kind, chaotic because it was democratic. The streets were full of it. Bus conductors waited with white towels wrapped around their necks like battle sashes, staring into the distance where no bus came. Flower sellers waited for the day's quota of kanakambaram that never arrived. Newspaper agents paced inside their shuttered stalls, wondering if the Dinamani van had broken down in Guindy. Milk packets had not made their usual appearance at dawn. Thereby, husbands waited for tea, wives waited to shout at husbands, children waited to be ignored. The whole city leaned forward, 1,000 chins jutting into a gray morning, thick with suspense. Was it coming, or wasn't it? The storm, the real storm, had become indistinguishable from the idea of the storm. Even the meteorological department, speaking from their whitewashed colonial building near Nungambakam, in the tones of state-sponsored uncertainty, was waiting for confirmation from the gods. The radio dutifully relayed their mood swings. Heavy rains likely, it said at 6:30. Storm will cross Pondicherry coast, it said at 7. Likely to hit Madras by evening, it announced at 7:30, sounding hopeful but not fully committed. By then, Vivid Bharati's rain-wet airwaves carried the final news that mattered. All schools across the Madras Corporation limits were closed, effective immediately. And so he was not faking a headache this time. He was granted a real, certified, all-India honored holiday. The cyclone, nameless, because Indian storms then came without brand labels, had done what no fever could, won him a sanctioned absence from school. But the holiday came with a price. He still needed to get the comic book. And now the comic book was more than an object. It was a quest. It was a grail. It was, by all logic and urban geography, unreachable. Because this was a full-blown storm, lashing sideways. Madras storms did not creep in. They pounced. Trees leaned like drunkards. Drainage systems, which under best conditions operated on blind faith, now went into full collapse. The main roads of Purasawalkam bloated like puffed rice. Side roads became tributaries of despair, and the thin conspiratorial lanes, the ones he knew by smell and shortcut, became impossible. Miller's Lane, which yesterday held the promise of comic book salvation, now hissed with frogs and eddied with sludge. Still, the day had to be lived. His father, unimpressed by both weather gods and radio forecasts, left for his office at 7:30 with his usual brisk efficiency, carrying 2 tiffin boxes, 1 folded umbrella, and 0 hesitation. His mother, who worked at the DMS, Director of Medical Services, was less convinced. She paced in a green sari with kojukatai dough sticking to her fingers, muttering about Sankatahara Chaturthi, about whether buses would run, about whether someone in her office would step into the meeting without her, and then she'd never be able to speak. all while she rolled and steamed the kojukatais, small dumplings for Ganesha, who, this month at least, came uninvited with thunder on his heels. There was no question of staying home alone. He and Gayatri were bundled off, armed with umbrellas and lunchboxes, to their Amama's house 5 doors away on the same street, a place that functioned like a maternal embassy during weather emergencies. Amama, the matriarch of the red house with maroon oxide floors, did not sit on any throne. She cooked, she wiped, she rocked, she scolded, she prayed. She fed people in shifting combinations. Her husband, his tata, was not keeping well that week and sat wrapped in a veshti and a shawl, sipping boiled water and occasionally sighing. Her son, his mama, worked for Britannia and had already left, one pant leg rolled up to avoid the water. His mummy, who worked in Shastri Bhavan, was contemplating whether to risk the bus or call in sick and burn one of her sacred casual leaves. Their daughter, Priya, had just been born and was asleep in a swing. Kaushik, their boy, ran around half-dressed and giggling, a permanent mischief glint in his eye. Gayatri, clutching her own lunchbox with drama, arrived slightly wetter than necessary and blamed him for not sharing umbrella space. She immediately found a dry corner and began her elaborate unpacking process. He, however, had no such clarity, because the problem had only gotten bigger. He still needed 5 rupees, and he still needed someone to take him through the flood-swallowed streets, through the slippery laneways, past the leaking awnings and broken flower pots, all the way to the small shop opposite the Lion Comics office, where the latest book, Ulaga Poril Archie, no less, would land, or had perhaps already landed. He knew that by 4 o'clock it would be gone. The shopkeeper would sell out, Ravi would get his copy, others would queue and collect, the world would move on, and he, who had waited for this day like a monk waits for moksha, would have nothing. Amama called him in for hot kanji and pickle, but he sat cross-legged by the window, watching the rain blur the rooftops, trying to come up with a plan. He had the waiting. Now he needed the miracle. Since his mother had, in a rare pre-dawn burst of administrative foresight, already packed the steel tiffin with lemon rice and curd rice wrapped in banana leaf, his Amama had, for once, one less thing to cook that afternoon. Not that she'd let her kitchen rest. The stove still hissed under a vessel of sambar. The coffee filter still breathed its last decoction. Gayatri was curled up somewhere near the radio, half listening to a story about a woman who had murdered her husband with a pressure cooker. Tata, who had been sick for a week and refused to see any doctor who charged more than 5 rupees, was asleep under a wool blanket, too thick for madras. And he, who by now had walked the length of the hallway twice, thrice, maybe 15 times, Archie comic clutched like a relic in his palm, had only one thought: how to leave, how to exit, how to cut through the walls and storm and well-meaning elders and find his way to the comic book shop on Miller's Road before the world's greatest book vanished into somebody else's plastic bag. Outside, the storm had taken its position, a full-lunged, large-hearted cyclone, howling like some forgotten Rakshasa newly exiled from the Bay of Bengal. The teasing kind of rain, the kind that half-dried the clothes on the line and ran away, had been dismissed for the season. The streets had become tributaries. The thin lane between the porch and the main gate had disappeared under a brown, surging stream that looked capable of eating chapals, small children, and the Tamil Nadu electricity board whole. He had tried opening the door once, just to try, just to test, just to smell the rain-soaked world that now held his book hostage. A gust of water slapped him across the face, and in that exact moment he saw Ravi. Ravi from the opposite house. Ravi who had a TV with color. Ravi who drank Complan with milk, even when he wasn't sick. Ravi who had, according to all rumors and at least 2 confirmed sightings, already placed a special request with the newsstand uncle to reserve Ulaga Poril Archie under his name. "Ravi!" he yelled. No response. Ravi walked on, hunched into his father's giant raincoat, disappearing into the watery veil like a man carrying state secrets. That was it. The book would be gone. The first batch would be sold out. He'd return tomorrow, and all they'd have would be Tinkle Double Digest and something about Phantom stealing a diamond in Bengali. He could cry. And perhaps he did, perhaps a little. At around 12:15 p.m., after Tata had been fed rice mashed into divine softness with a hint of rasam, after Gayatri had fallen asleep with her legs hanging off the diwan, after Priya had screamed and been rocked and screamed again, and after Kaushik had whacked the wall with his yellow plastic cricket bat, thinking it was Imran Khan's fastest ball, he approached Amama again. She was wiping down the gas stove. The same stove that had cooked 3 meals a day for 30 years. The same stove under which a gecko family now resided, uninvited but tolerated. "Amama," he said, "can I have 5 rupees?" "5 rupees for what, Da?" she asked without turning. "For the next comic book," he said, lifting up the time-traveling Archie like it was proof of divine calling. "This is the last part. The robot went to find the emperor. I need the next part." "I'll ask your Amma tomorrow. She said not to give you money for comics anymore. You're buying too much." "Too much? Too much? What was too much? Could someone ever have too much oxygen? Too much friendship? Too much Archie?" He sat, he stood, he walked, he paced. Kaushik came by and said, "Bow," which meant ball, but he couldn't. He just couldn't. His life was in ruins. He was pacing the perimeter of a crumbling empire. After lunch, eaten in the spirit of a last meal, though it was probably the best rasam he'd had that week, he cornered her again. "I need the book now, Amama. If I don't get it today, it will be gone. Gone." And to his own horror, tears began. Fat, childish tears, unjustified by war or famine, wholly earned by a delayed robot. Amama, mid-wipe, turned. Her eyes softened. Her hands, forever smelling of turmeric and starch, cupped his cheek. "Crying for this? Come, eat your lunch. I'll give you 5 rupees. Salvation came through Amama's infinite and elastic love, the currency of grandmothers. 5 rupees, paper, ink, national tender. In that moment, the key to life itself. One problem solved. Now for the storm. He did not know it yet, but history would record this as the moment when the siege of waiting finally crumbled. Somewhere, the Mahatma had spun his last charka, because now, after 30 straight days of counting backwards from hope to desperation, he was done. The waiting was over. No more circling calendars, no more dreaming under desks, no more biting the ends of Natraj HP pencils while imagining the robot flying across a double-spread page and punching the villain into an onomatopoeic explosion. He had waited long enough. Too long. Longer than Rama had waited to cross the ocean. Longer than Kamal Hassan had waited to win a national award. And now that he had 5 rupees in hand, an uncreased Ashokan lion staring up at him like it knew this was going to be spent on sin, he knew what had to be done. "I'll go now, Amama," he said, still trying to keep his voice within the limits of 5th standard civility. "I'll go and come back in 5 minutes. She paused in the act of wringing her dishcloth dry. "Go where?" "To get the book. It must have come. It's Wednesday." "Which shop?" "Miller's Road." A gasp, an audible grandmotherly intake of moral oxygen. "Miller's Road? In this weather?" "Yes, just the small Sandhu. I'll jump and go." "Sandhu? That Miller's Lane is a river now. Even the cat didn't cross it this morning." He looked at her blankly. The words were sounds. They did not mean what they meant. He could not hear the word wait anymore. The word had become a disease. It was a fog in his ears, a tremor in his knees. What is 5 rupees if not for this? What is a Wednesday if not for this? "I'll go and come, Amama. I swear. I'll jump. I won't fall." Run? Ayo, your amma will kill me. She said don't let him out at any cost. What if she comes back late? The book will be sold out by then. That last phrase, sold out, was the matchstick. To not own Ulaga Poril Archie, to never touch the pages that Ravi would touch first, to not be part of the sacred circle of the first readers, the chosen few. This was unthinkable. He had to go. The robot had to be summoned. Okay, she said, after what must have been a century of hesitation. Let me make coffee for Tata. Then I'll come with you. What? She said it as if it were nothing, as if gods came down in the rain to walk with children for comics every other Wednesday, as if the laws of the land, the warnings of the weatherman, the instructions of his mother, and the ancient taboos about going through the Sandu during a cyclone didn't apply to Amamas. Maybe they didn't. She folded the end of her sari back over her shoulder, straightened it with that fierce casualness that only women who had raised generations possessed, ladled perfect dark filter decoction into boiling milk, added the exact amount of sugar, a skill like neurosurgery, poured it all into the prize steel tumbler, set aside a smaller one for him. You also want? He nodded. She passed him the half tumbler like it was a pact. They sipped. The storm roared. Kaushik banged the red plastic ball into the wall again and again. She packed the umbrella, black, slightly bent at the tip, a veteran of 1,000 rain battles, under her arm. Told Tata, who had already lain down again after lunch, 5 minutes. He didn't ask where. Why would he? When did men ever ask the right questions? She turned to him and said, Come. That was it. Come. A word older than rain, older than the city, a word that meant permission, a word that meant the storm had lost. He rose, and together they stepped into the torrent. She went first, umbrella tucked beneath one elbow like a third limb grown out of necessity. With one hand she held his, firm, soft, calloused, like the inside of an areca leaf, and with the other she measured the earth, placing each foot where it might find the least resistance. A game of hopscotch against the weather, against the grime, against the city itself. He followed, stepping exactly where she stepped, like he was tracing the path of a known constellation. The rain hadn't stopped, not fully. It had mellowed, yes. It had retired from its frenzy and entered a new mood, sullen and intermittent. The kind that let you walk, but never let you forget it was still in charge. Their house was the last one on the corner of the lane, the same lane that had seen births and weddings and electricity failures and summer dust storms, and now, yet again, this, flooding. As they emerged from the gate, still damp from the downpour, he noticed that the games had resumed. Across the street, Vinod and Prasanna were playing trade business, the low-rent, high-drama Indian cousin of Monopoly, their tokens makeshift coins, the board already soaked at one corner. Two younger girls shouted out versions of Ice Poise, the Indian street mutation of I Spy, said with defiance and domestic reinvention. Someone called out, Day, we're going with party. He waved with his free hand. The other was still held. They crossed the edge of the lane. On the opposite side, Meena Typing Institute was under siege. A whole lane of water had swallowed the entrance. Typewriters perhaps now dreaming underwater. It was, tragically, an omen. The Sandu they had to cross next might be worse. He winced. The water might have retreated some, but the battle was far from over. Balaji Musicals was still at it, flooding the street with Ilayaraja's synths and strings at full throttle, as though music, if played loudly enough, could beat back a cyclone. The grocery store stood lonely, abandoned, its green wooden shutter half drawn like a sigh. The vegetable vendor, determined and absurd, wore a torn polythene bag on his head like it was war armor. His pushcart vegetables were wrapped in plastic sheets that gave each item a fogged anonymity. One could make out the shape of a tomato, a lady's finger, a mutinous brinjal, all looking like captives in a rain museum. They reached the miller's lane. It had not escaped the storm's tyranny, but it had aged into a manageable mess. The puddles had shrunk into squelches. Strategically placed stones and elevated concrete bits now became islands of salvation. Amama placed her foot on one, and he followed. Another stone, another careful landing. It was a dance of evasion, learned in childhood, perfected in motherhood, passed on in grandmotherhood. The lane spat them out onto the wider street, and now Miller's Road stood ahead like a soaked runway. The actual bookstall wasn't immediate. It sat 100 feet ahead, just before the unofficial bus stop, which itself sat before the official one. The buses, those Palavan rebels of the state transport department, never stopped where they were supposed to anyway. Then, splash. An auto rickshaw, its driver blind to their existence and deaf to civic guilt, rammed into a pothole with theatrical precision. A sheet of muddy water leapt out and hit them both on the side. He gasped. She winced. He immediately looked at his shirt, his shorts. Would the book survive this kind of return trip? He didn't have it yet, but already he worried like a man with cargo. Still, the mission was clear. The water could soak his knees, the auto could drown in guilt, the city could crumble. He had to get the book, the last stretch. He was ready to run. But something was wrong. The newspaper stall, the one with its blue tarpaulin roof and its bent metal shutter, was closing. The shopkeeper, his eyes narrow, was pulling down the shutter one panel at a time. "No," he muttered. He let go of her hand. "Book! Sir! Book!" he shouted, breath ragged. The man turned. "What?" "The Ulaga Poril Archie. Today's new one." The man looked disinterested. "I don't know." The final shutter was halfway down. The lock was in his hand. Then, from inside, a voice, a teenage voice. "Iruku." There was a god. Out came a boy, shorts, shirtless, holding it, the book. It existed. It was real. It had already been read, at least halfway, by the boy who looked smug in a way only someone holding someone else's destiny could look. "It came half an hour ago," the boy said, waving the book like it was an ice cream he wasn't selling. "It's good." He didn't hear the second sentence, or any sentence after that. His world had collapsed into color and paper. The 5-rupee note leapt from his pouch like it had a life of its own. The boy grabbed it, dropped a fresh copy, unopened, unread, unsmelt, into his hands like a sacred prasad. It was thick. It was broader than usual. The cover. Oh God. The cover. Robot Archie, larger than tanks, was carrying Victor and Thompson on his metallic shoulders, sprinting with impossible speed. Behind him, a military tank pointed its cannon right at them. Victor's eyes were round with horror. Thompson's mouth was open in a silent scream. But Archie, oh Archie, was unfazed, unstoppable, unwavering. He had it now. He held it, in his soaked, muddy, small brown hands. And even the cyclone, watching from the sky above, quietly stepped aside. At that exact moment, when he clasped the book like it was Moses's own tablet, when the 5 rupees had successfully shape-shifted into a dream incarnate, when the storm briefly paused to admire its own theater of chaos, the great Indian weight came undone. In Ludhiana, the cricket ball that had been swallowed by the neighbor's kitchen tandoor emerged triumphantly, rolling back onto the gully pitch like a prodigal son returning home. In Secunderabad, the boy whose father had gone off to Riyadh and hadn't written in 11 months got a letter, a postcard, a photograph, and a box of imported biscuits simultaneously. In Madurai, the firecracker factory had released its mothers an hour early for once. One such mother came home not just alive, but triumphant, with 2 weeks' leave sanctioned, a small bonus wrapped in a crumpled envelope, and a parcel of Akawal sweets clutched tight like a holy relic. Her daughter fainted, then woke up laughing. Somewhere in Bihar, a class monitor who had once been falsely accused of stealing a geometry box was exonerated on the school notice board, his name underlined thrice in red ink. In Dadar, a paper boat that had vanished into a manhole reappeared in the Arabian Sea and sailed into a fisher boy's waiting hands. Across Kerala, the monsoon momentarily halted to compose a poem in Malayalam and offered it to a shy poet's doorstep. In 1,000 by-lanes and 10,000 rooftops, gully cricket balls that had vanished into tyrannical uncles' balconies, wrathful aunties' kitchens, and the infinite void of municipal drains all bounced back in unison, ricocheting off window grills, cartwheeling down stairwells, squeezing through keyholes, and found their rightful fields, greeted by open palms and yelps of joy. It was said later that at least 100,000 children swore they had seen their lost tennis balls roll toward them, freshly cleaned and unscuffed, as though God Himself had given them a second chance. And then, this part was quietly filed in the Department of Cosmic Corrections, 25,000 unresolved civil court cases across India's high courts were resolved at once. Judges blinked, lawyers collapsed, clients wept. Judgments appeared, written across the courtroom walls in golden script rather than on paper. As per Dharma, as per truth, as per what should have always been. Somewhere in Tambaram, a girl waiting for her school admission letter got the envelope, and with it a seat, a scholarship, and an ink pen she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. A boy in Guwahati was finally told he wasn't adopted after all. The Delhi Electricity Board accidentally overcompensated a bill and gave 137 families a refund. And somewhere, a bright and smart child waiting for a late train was issued by the same cosmic clerks a flight ticket that would itself wait, undiscovered, for another 5 years, to a country at the far end of the sky where South India, for once, was the one waiting. No one saw it happen. But the atmosphere shifted, just a little, like a country exhaling after holding its breath for years. As if the storm had unlocked something latent and overdue and aching for release. The Grand National Unwaiting had begun, and in the middle of it all, he read. He stood under the umbrella held by his amamma and read. And with each page turned, another chain somewhere in the country quietly snapped. They had barely turned into the narrow lane, the one that split from Miller's Road and curled toward Velala Street like a forgotten line in a forgotten poem, when the rain returned with new rage, unrepentant, unforgiving, as though it had remembered its job halfway through and come sprinting back. Amama opened the umbrella again, one hand on his wrist, the other holding the handle tucked into her ribs. The umbrella, that ancient black dome with 3 bent spokes, opened with a grunt, barely enough for 2, barely enough for him. But he had no eyes for the weather. His eyes were somewhere else entirely, inside the thick, wet-smelling comic book in his hands. Ulaga Poril Archie. The world had ended and restarted for him with that title, and now it began again. Archie was in Europe, or somewhere made to look like Europe. A robot conscript in a world war that looked both familiar and comically misdrawn, like the artist had half seen a history book and dreamed the rest. Victor and Thompson had been captured by the enemy, a boot-stomping army of helmeted villains with sharp German consonants and no mercy, and Archie, poor Archie, had been chained in a yard of rusted metal and sorrow. He strained, he bent. He could not escape. The chains had been drawn too tight even for robot arms. He frowned. He had waited a month for this? For Archie to be defeated? He turned the page with a damp thumb. The panel showed Victor shouting for help. Another showed Archie slumped in defeat. His lips were pressed. His chest was tightening. And then something shifted. He turned the page, And the next panel was no longer the war, no longer Archie, no longer robot nor captor. It was him. A drawing of a boy walking in the rain, an umbrella stretched above him, and a woman beside him, just outside the frame. He turned the page again, the close-up. A boy holding Ulaga Poril Archie, reading while walking. The panel after that, his head turning toward the source of the umbrella, toward the woman holding it. He looked up. Mama. Only now he saw. Only now he noticed. Her sari clung to her like a second skin on the side where the umbrella did not reach. Her blouse was soaked. Her shoulder was streaming. Her sandals sloshed with every step, and her thin cotton petticoat sagged, defeated by the flood. She held the umbrella like a shield above him, adjusting every few seconds, tilting it to block a gust, to cover his comic, to shelter his head. One arm was getting tired. He could see the shaking, but she didn't let go. And even as she stepped over a puddle with a small wince, even as her left foot sank ankle-deep into street water, even then, she said it gently, tenderly, as though to a prince. "Careful, Kana. Don't let your chapel slip." He didn't know when the tears began, whether they were for Archie, bound and shackled in a prison of iron, or for her, wet on one side, quiet as dusk, holding up the umbrella so that neither rain nor world would touch the book or its reader. Whether it was sorrow or understanding or some new word that had no name yet. He closed the comic, tucked it gently into his shirt, pressing it against the thudding place in his chest. He reached for the umbrella. "Come inside," he said. "You're getting wet." She shook her head, smiled that sideways smile that didn't disturb a single wrinkle. "No, Kana. You read. I'll hold." She didn't say it like a heroine in a storybook or a martyr in a moral science class. She said it the way one might say, "The stove is off. The door is locked. I'll hold." As if that's what grandmothers were built for. One body to keep the rain off. One soul to make a roof when God forgot. Years would pass, and the rain would keep every one of its appointments. It would flood the miller's lane the year the results came, and the year the visa did. Schools would fade into offices. Cycle bells would grow into marriage invitations. First crushes into second mortgages. Illnesses would come. The long ones. The naming ones. The stove that had cooked 3 meals a day for 30 years would cook 2, then 1, then be wiped down a final time by hands that were not hers. And one winter, a fever would ground him on the wrong side of the planet, writing him the one leave letter he never wanted, from a funeral in Madras, where it was finally his turn to hold the umbrella. The rain would go on falling, on a shop that no longer sold comics, on a lane that no longer flooded, on people who no longer waited, because everything, even robots, came home delivered. And some evenings, in the country at the far end of the sky, it would catch him bareheaded between the car and the front door, and he would stand in it a little longer than necessary, holding nothing over his own head, and be 8 years old. But this would remain. This one, ordinary miracle. A narrow lane in Madras, the waterlogged street, one umbrella, him beneath it, and one woman who never stepped into a spotlight, who never asked to be thanked, who stood in the storm and chose, without a single line of dialogue, to get wet so that he might read. A mama. To be continued.